Hello and welcome to our recap of Round 8 of the 2024 FIDE Candidates. GM Max here, presenting you with the games, and we are starting with a game between Praggnanandhaa against Alireza Firouzja. This game being played after the rest day. And here White came up with a fresh idea of knight c to b5, which is a move I had seen before actually. It was the idea of Arjun Erigaisi also, but yeah, basically we see White playing this to play bishop d3, saying that his knight is defended, and in the game after a6, take, knight d4, because if you play knight c3, the knight ends up a little bit dominated after d5 by the pawns, but with knight d4, White keeps the placement of knight a little bit more flexible, and, even though it's a very unusual idea by White, I think that White actually managed to potentially get a little something out of the opening where White played castles. It could also make an argument for playing b3 and making it that when they do play knight g6, it's harder for Black to develop his king's bishop. But in the game, Prague went for a little bit more of a, let's say, normal setup with c3. But that being said, c3 maybe isn't the most critical continuation. His plan was to try and push ahead with b4 and grab some space on the queen side. But overall, it seemed that Firouzja handled this pretty well, where after rook to e1... Black just doesn't have any real weaknesses. Like, something you notice with the Taimanov is just how flexible Black's pieces and pawn structure are. And Black leveraged his flexibility by playing the move d5, just putting the pawn in the center. If White tries keeping close with e5, maybe trying to attack on the king side, Black's just going to rip open the center with d4, and that's going to give Black very decent play. White ended up playing the move bc5, and you're kind of admitted with his next move after rook b7 that White is not better and should be happy just to equalize. So we had a little exchanging combination. In the end, Black, of course, gained his pawn back pretty easily. And maybe Black has some symbolic advantage due to the pawns here being isolated, but it's hard to feasibly make something of it. And the game did ultimately end in a draw after not too many adventures. The idea of h3 is it allows us to take on a6 without ever worrying about any back rank issues, because we did make a look for the king. Black had the same idea and played the move h6, a5, queen e5, a little bit of a fancy way to do things, but ends up with the same outcome. Queen a6, counter-attacking the rook. Black plays the move rook a8, queen c4, and again, Black can try to make something of the isolated pawn, but it's kind of a little bit of a pipe dream, and with queen d5 can sort of tell that the players just want to get to move 40 and agree a draw, where not much really happened. Just players continuing to shuffle around. The weakness of d5 and e3, c3 kind of evening themselves out. And when all the pieces get hoovered off and they hit move 40, the draw was immediately agreed here. If you're enjoying these recaps, then do make sure to hit the like button and also consider subscribing so that you can stay notified of other videos like this one that you're also very likely to enjoy. Okay, let's get into the next game between Nepomniachtchi against Abasov. And it's kind of a funny situation to see Nepomniachtchi facing his own main opening against e4 in the Petrov. And he decided to transpose back into an exchange French, where if you're not sure how this could arise from an exchange French, it would be e6, d4, d5, take, and Black being committed to the move knight c6, which is the main line to be fair. But after bishop d3, the normal continuation would be bishop d6, and you can either choose between Carlsen's queen e2 move, or you can castle and play h3 and try to make something of the e5 square. But if Black plays precisely, then he should have, of course, a perfectly fine position. But in the game, Black played a move c5, looking to be a little bit more dynamic, where, of course, Black would be quite happy to have an IQP position and to develop the bishop with a tempo as such. So White just plays castles. Black plays the move c4, kind of an important move here. White just retreats the bishop. You can also play rook e1 first, just so your bishop can kind of go to f1, not block in the rook. But objectively, the difference is quite marginal. It'll still reach a very similar position to what we see in the game with knight c6, b3, take, and optically speaking, White's structure is a little bit better because Black has one more pawn island, but it's hard to really make something meaningful of this because it's hard to get at the d5 pawn for one thing. And if you do play c4, trying to give your structure a bit of dynamism, well, the flip side of that is black does get the b4 outpost for a piece, and that gets shown rather clearly in the game with knight b4. And I mean, this was a pretty long game, but balance was never really disturbed, you could say, where black just took his pawn back, and you get this IQP position where you've got a pass pawn, but it's pretty well blockaded for the moment. Queen f3 puts some pressure on d5, and bishop b4 once again negates it. Queen g3 trying to create some attacking chances, but of course black sidesteps it. Rook a2, a5, and both players just playing very solidly here. Black plays queen b6, eyeing the pawn. White in turn defensive with rook e4. And here is where the game gets just a little bit sharper for the moment, where black realizes that if white gets in moves like rook h4 and bishop h6, this is spelling very bad news for the black king. So black has to be a little bit precise, and to Abasov's credit, he found the move of knight c3 here, realizing that the rook can't move because of the this way because of the knight e2 fork that will come up after first takes and then knight e2, something like this as it were, which will come with check, by the way, so it just wins a queen directly. So white goes rook e3. We have some exchanges. Black takes the pawn on d4, which at first might look like you're just losing a piece after bishop b2, but the point is that black now played the move of b5, counter-attacking the knight, and it's not so easy to find a great square for the knight, actually, because let's say you play knight e5, for instance. Black will just go rook c8 and just keep this pin alive, or keep the protection alive, where if you play rook c1, then knight e2, and you can sort of see how this goes wrong for white, where white is getting back rank mated, as it were. So that's why you can't really have your cake and eat it here as white. You just have to basically exchange in one way or another. Nepo did it the fancy way, playing rook c3, setting up some skewer ideas, as it were. bc4, rook c2, but c3 is just a good defense, just forcing all the pieces off the board. Rook c3 was white's attempt to keep some play in the position, but with queen d6, queen f3, bishop e5 just fully neutralize everything, and the ending is basically just a draw. Although of course Nepo being the high rate player, he's going to try and squeeze, and he's basically made his career out of turning these sort of slightly better end games into wins. But yeah, here it's just nothing though. Like the players played on for a bunch more moves, but black is kind of interesting to see that black's actually placing his pawns on the same color or complex as white's bishop. Because normally, you wouldn't want to limit the scope of your bishop this way, but here it actually kind of works out. Because their bishop is also a little bit stuck, and it's kind of hard to get at the a5 pawn effectively. White try to bring the king towards a4, but even in this case, what happens is that, even if you take here, there's still going to be, rook takes b3 at the end of the captures, as it were. It's a little bit funny here, but yeah, we'll get there in the end. Black played a move rook e8, going for more active play, where he sacrificed the pawn. Bit of loud background noise, hoping you guys can't hear it, but it does distract me a little bit at least. So bishop f6, rook e2, this was black's idea, just to give up a pawn, but at least get the pieces really active as such. So after b4, once white plays this, when all the pawns on one side of the board, it kind of is telling that, white's not really going to win this position, especially when the king is also a long way away. White played h4, trying to, isolate black with a pawn on h6 and get a passed pawn. But it just doesn't really amount to that much. The king being cut off for white here really makes it almost impossible for white to realistically play for a win. After king d3, bishop g5, obviously rook getting like this would just be an ironclad draw, where the king can even come in this way to go after the pawns. But after bishop f2, rook d5, they shuffled for a few more moves, but the result was never really in doubt. The one thing you have to watch out for is just don't blunder your rook to a rook g5 tactic. But as long as you don't do that, the game is pretty much over. Where black just start to give perpetual attacks, because the threat of bishop e3 is a problem, and if you play move f4, then the bishop is going to come around this way to make white's life a little unpleasant. So white just ends up accepting the draw as you would expect, and draw was agreed by threefold repetition here. So first two games, both played pretty well. Neither side gave the other any gigantic chances, as it were. However, the other two games did really shake up the standings, so let's have a look at them, starting with this game between Nakamura against Caruana. And recently Nakamura has actually been doing quite well against Caruana in some recent games, like winning their, I think, last few classical games before this tournament. And as you might expect, Caruana is sort of sticking true to his Archangel setup. He did a award-winning course on Chessable with this variation, sort of extolling the virtues of Black's position here. Of course, Caruana being the world's leading expert in this position after players like Tkachev and Shirov kind of developed the theory in the early to mid 1990s. But yeah, d3 is a way to avoid stuff like knight e4 and have some extra options against the bishop e7 setup. But the price you pay is that you do make bishop c5 a bit better for Black than usual. So we had c3, castles, rook e1. Like, it's all pretty standard maneuvering by both sides. Knight to e7, knight to g6. White could push d4 if he wants to, but it would be a very different type of position then. In a game, Nakamura decides to keep a bit more tension in the position. That, for example, if bishop a7, just play like h3, knight g3, and just kind of steadily prepare the move d4, so that when d4 does come, it's kind of harder for Black to pressure our center. I mean, it's just very, very standard for the d3 royal pairs and related systems like the Italian with d3, which have a very similar kind of structure and pieces going on similar squares. But in the game, Black played the direct d5, and okay, you saw the fact that Black spent 9 minutes to move already tells you that Caruana was maybe not so comfortable in this particular position and they're not fully prepared for it, meaning that Nakamura is sort of, I guess gamble isn't the right word, but like his opening choice kind of paid off in a way. And bishop e3 in itself is kind of a clever move here. Sort of preparing the move knight e5, and you might be wondering, well, Max, what if White just plays knight e5 directly? But then Black has a counter trick, which is actually pretty standard for these openings, which is to take on f2 and then play knight takes e5. And now you probably would just play king g1, just with a unbalanced position with the bishops versus Black's activity. Because if you play rook e5, queen f6 will win the exchange. And note that if you had the bishop on b3, you'd be able to go queen f3 and then, take d5 and win 2 pieces for the rook. So we can start to understand a little bit of the idea of Nakamura's bishop b3. Black defended well with c6 so that you can still play the bishop f2 trick. White played the move d4. A computer wants to play bishop g5. Yeah, as well, this baby just started crying outside just as I was, just outside our position. But yeah, bishop g5. The idea of this is basically that you could sort of argue that the move f6 is a little bit weakening here, which means ideas like d4 or h4, h5 may gain a little bit in strength, as it were. Maybe h4 not so much because they can go bishop g4 and reply, but let's say if their bishop had moved already, then h4 would make a little more sense, let's say. But yeah, after d4 takes knight d4, we get this sort of deceptive position where at first it might look like, okay, Black just plays normal moves and it's just a draw, but the knight on g6 is potentially a little bit offside in some positions, and the sort of move that the engine suggests here of bishop e6 and basically sort of unbalancing the structure, get counterplay, is maybe not the most natural from a human point of view, but it does appear to be the most effective. Because sort of now it's White's turn to sort of defend a little bit awkwardly, and Black will get quite good counterplay with his active pieces, but yeah, like I said, not the most human continuation to sacrifice the pawn for pure activity, as it were. In the game, Black played the move knight f6. Not an outright mistake, but I think that White was probably reasonably happy to see such a retreat. h3 just make sure bishop g4 doesn't come with tempo. We had take, knight d5. And position is definitely fine for Black. He's got a good hold over the d5 square, blockading the IQP. But with the bishop pair, White's got chances as well. It's a position where the better player on the day is going to win. And, well, you can see from the results that it was Nakamura who was a better player on the day. But, yeah, it was kind of interesting to see how, at some point, Black just started to self-destruct a little bit. For now, though, he played it fine. Knight f6 is good. Kind of forced White to go bishop g5 to not lose the pawn on d4 after the rook moves. So bishop g5, h6, and yeah, white lost his bishop pair advantage, but he does still have pretty decent piece play, and you never know when a move like, I don't know, h4, h5 or knight h5 may give chances. For now, though, it's not really threatening anything, and probably black would just even sit on this position and just be fine here. Knight h5 is well met by queen g5, and an ending like this just doesn't really give anything special to white whatsoever. In fact, black is one who's kind of happy to trade the queens when white is left with an isolated pawn. But yeah, it's to say that black's just going to be fine with bishop d5 and just trading off the pieces. But in the game, black rushed it a little bit with queen g5, which white could have considered a move like queen c3 or even queen b4 to try and hit the weaknesses as such. But yeah, Nakamura decided to go rook e3, just keep that tension. Knight f4. h4 is quite a tricky move here, and this is sort of where things start to get practically a little bit difficult for black, because if you play queen h4, you do win a pawn for the moment, but then you have to weaken your king with a move like g5, which also kind of sidelines the queen. Such in this position, it's actually white who is going to be much better. We've got moves like queen f, knight f5, and queen b4 to really exploit some of the fresh weaknesses in black's position. So that's why black played queen d5. Although maybe going back to d8 and leaving this square for the knight might have been the better of the two choices, let's say. Still I think we're a fine position for black. But, maybe it's concerned about rook e5 and, not feeling sure which way the knight should go. Because, knight d5, like queen d3, this definitely starting to get slightly unpleasant with, some good piece pressure for white. But if black plays king f8, then, he can probably defend it, let's say. But in the game, we had queen d5. White played a move rook e4, hitting the knight. And, black played a move of knight to g6 here. The automatic analysis says it's an accuracy, but its suggestion of knight g2 doesn't really appeal to me all that much. Like, it feels like the knight is just going to be completely trapped on g2 in this case. Of course, you don't play king g2 because f5 would cause big problems with the pin. But yeah, this vision really is like a little bit computerish. Like the idea is like bishop h3 and you're playing like knight f4 and trying to have some mating ideas like this. But yeah, personally, I don't really buy it. I feel like this is not really the right direction for black. It feels like white's just going to be much better here. So I think knight g6 is fine, despite what the analysis gives. But maybe it's better to go queen d7 and maybe this is a better defense. But white's definitely the one with pressure at this point. After knight f8, rook e5, you might also notice that Caruana's already getting a bit low at time, which also contributes some of these slightly inaccurate decisions, where after h5, strategically it's logical to fix the pawns, but it is true that queen f4 is probably asking some tougher questions, with the idea of potentially like swinging the knight and queen over to attack their king, or even queen e4 for that matter. But h5 was played, and it kind of paid off because one of the hardest things to do in a bad position and when you're low on time is to sit still, and something like queen b6 is it's a natural enough move, but it feels a bit weird to move away from the king. But if you do play like queen f6 and move the queen back and forth, like the engine will tell you it's okay, but like psychologically it just feels wrong, like to give white 2 free moves in a sense. But yeah, not clear what else you can do in a sense other than just sit on the position and hope for the best. Bishop d7 is sort of an attempt to try to relieve some of the pressure with exchanges, but the problem is after take and knight f5. Well, the bishop also is now in a much worse square after the recapture, and white does have some threats here, where the move queen b4 is very, very unpleasant for black actually, where there just isn't really a good way to defend the pawn on b7, and if you let white just take the pawn, it's pretty clear that white is just winning. But in the game after b5, the problem is that white played knight e7, king h8, knight d5, and you're threatening to checkmate on f8 as well as the attack on the queen. And therefore Caruana resigned here, and it's a very well played game by Nakamura actually, where maybe he didn't really get anything much out of the opening, but he just kind of had this normal position where he just kind of outplayed Caruana with just steadily building up the pressure. So definitely a very nice game on his part here. And some notes like in the last couple of years, that Nakamura has really started to perform very well against Caruana and become a bit of a difficult opponent for him, let's say. But let's see the final game between Vidit against Gukesh. And yeah, as impressive as Nakamura's game was, like, it's probably the game of the round, but I also was really impressed by the way Gukesh beat Vidit, because it wasn't like he just did some sort of like berserker sort of attack or something, but he just kind of just outplayed him on technique. Now, after d3, the normal move is just to go bishop c5 and, just develop in some conventional way with like a6 or a5. But instead, Gukesh plays a move of a6, which actually turns out to be not as bad as it looks, where you're sort of baiting white into playing a move like knight g5, but saying that after d5 takes and knight a5, that your position is actually not so bad because you are stopping them playing the move bishop b5 check in this case. So it's not so obvious that d3 is like more useful than a6 despite the initial appearances. I know you can play moves like bishop d6 castles and almost play it like a kind of much improved elephant gambit in a weird way. But yeah, in the game, Vidit wasn't baited. He just played castles and sort of accepted the transposition, if you like, to kind of more normal territory. Well, I guess c3 would be the most normal move, but maybe in that case, Gukesh was going to play d6 and kind of transition to a g5, g4 setup, but where white committed himself to castling a bit early and, lost some options like, for example, c3 and knight d2, where you can sort of take some of the sting out of g5 plans with the delayed castling. But anyway, after a4, black did play to move bishop c5 and red bishop e3, d6. An interesting decision in itself not to take and open up the f-file for white's rook, but instead saying, well, you can take me and then I get the open file for my pieces as such. And also a square for the queen on d6 that works out. So yeah, that's sort of one way to kind of make things a little more unbalanced, but for the moment, Vidit wanted to insist on Gukesh taking on e3. And the way he did that is he played the move b4 in this position, which based on how the game played out maybe doesn't look like the best decision. A move like queen b3 and playing, takes is probably a little bit more critical here. Though even then, I still feel like black is doing reasonably okay. Like you can play rook b8 and prepare the development of your bishop to, e6 or g4. Actually, even b5 it has also become a thing with the rook opposite the queen. But yeah, at this point, pretty much any move I think is going to be reasonable for black, let's say. After b4, black played takes. And now that the baby stopped crying, I can now show you the first mistake that Vidit made in this game. Probably the best approach is just to take and just kind of accept that this position is just kind of going to be fine for black. Something like knight e7 is a pretty typical maneuver, so you can just kind of maneuver the knight around, make your structure more flexible, and if they do play d5, you kind of get this weird King's Indian structure where neither side is really getting good play on either flank, so it just ends up being kind of equal. But in the game, white played b5, and yeah, that gave back a little bit of an opening, sort of saying just this subtle point that some of these squares become a little bit weakened. After take, queen c2, knight d7. Yeah, funny enough, the computer actually already slightly prefers black, and I think it's because of the fact that this b5 pawn becomes a subtle but quite significant weakness later in the game. And like at this point, the computer will tell you like any move is about the same strength, but I do kind of like, from a human point of view, Gukesh's queen e8, because it just sets up these annoying ideas of kind of going after this pawn at different stages, and all the kind of force white to commit to something it's around this point, when then we can sort of adapt ourselves accordingly. Like for example, I think that the engine suggestion of playing d5 and c4 is not really something that any human would seriously consider, because you're just giving such a beautiful outpost to the knight on c5, and well, there's even this very beautiful idea of going queen a7 in a kind of Rubinstein style to like put pressure here. But if white's not making any progress on the queen side, like it's kind of hard to see what else you're doing. Like knight h4, black's just going to go g6 and just shut out the king side play before it even begins. So we can kind of feel how like queen e8 is just a very good move from a human point of view, like actually better than the engine moves against a human in my opinion. And that's sort of reflecting how the game played out. Like rook a1, it does cover against the other threat of queen e8, which is, to take on d4 and win a pawn. But now the queen side becomes a bit more of an issue after rook a5, c4. And Queen A8, it's almost like white has a space disadvantage in a weird sort of way. Like the E4 pawn is doubled, the B5 pawn was a bit of a target, and now he's kind of taking advantage of the gaps in white's position here. And if they do play something like Queen B1, you can always play, even Rook B6 and kind of eye the E4 pawn in this way, as it were, while you play like Rook A2 and get things moving on the A file. Speaking of that, after H3, Black did play the move Rook E8, just preparing for the invasion on the A file. King H2 is not really a great move, but it's already not so easy to give white good advice. Like maybe Knight B1, but it just looks, it looks kind of ugly to have to retreat and reroute the knight like this. But maybe improving the worst placed piece is the play here. After King H2, B6, I mean, this is just an absolute dream for Black. Black has got the pressure on so many of white's weaknesses, and Queen A4 is, kind of it's the icing on the cake, just setting up that Alekhine gun with the, queen behind at least one of the rooks. Realizing things getting pretty difficult, Vidit searched for some counterplay with Knight H4 and Knight F5. For the moment, though, there isn't really any big threat here. Well, to be fair, I guess bringing a knight into play is sort of a strategic threat. So Gukesh just uses a little prophylaxis, stops that with King F8. Rook F1, Rook A1. I mean, Engine kind of prefers Rook A2, but I think that, just trading off some of white's best attackers can hardly be a bad thing. We had Queen D3. If they do trade into an ending, I mean, even this ending is one that is going to be hard work for white to survive, because it's just so easy to kind of get at the white weaknesses in this sort of position and just keep steadily improving things. After Queen D3, Black played a very nice move off Queen B4, just preparing for the rook to kind of come in. To deal with this, white played Rook A1, but already it starts to feel like white is starting to kind of have a losing position, where, a move like Queen C2 already just feels very passive, right? And if you play C5 as it happened in the game, well, it's a good attempt, but it just kind of falls short here. Like DC5, Knight C5, and white just doesn't really have anything. After Knight C4, Queen E1, Gukesh is always, very alert. He has sort of his style is maybe not as obviously tactical as Abdus Satoris, but definitely very, very tactically sharp in a very wide range of positions. And after Rook E2, he did find the mating sequence from here to finish off the king. I mean, to be fair, everything wins for Black because he's up material as well. But Knight H5, and Black continues to be accurate until the end. Knight DF6, and it's just very hard for white to get out of the mate. Even G5 is a mate threat here, so white plays Knight H6, and normal people would probably just take the knight and just win that way, but Gukesh, being an excellent calculator, figured out that actually Queen H2 is even a faster mate than just taking the knight, which led to a bit of a nice finish. Rook F1, G4 was played, Rook takes F5, and if you're wondering, well, what if white just takes the knight, the rook? Well, Queen G3, King G5, Knight H7, and because it's made in one move with King H5, Queen H3, this is why white resigned after Knight to H7. And pretty interesting round, actually, where, I mean, there weren't sort of massive fireworks in any of the games, but I think it was just very satisfying somehow the way that Nakamura and Gukesh just kind of outplayed their opponents in these, definitely the sort of games which I think, for those who are watching us, maybe more for improvement and for entertainment, you can definitely learn a tremendous amount from these sort of games where one player just kind of outplays the other. And speaking of that, of improvement, if you are interested in, taking your chess next level and improving a lot more easily and a lot more quickly, then, I am still available for private chess lessons. You can reach out to me using the links in the description below. I also want to hear from you what was the most interesting move or the most interesting game for you out of our selection here. Do let me know that in the comments below, and I look forward to seeing all of you for the round 9 recap tomorrow. So until then, take care.